Fellow members, good morning. Let's call to order the meeting of the panel on education. There is a quorum already. Since last meeting, the Secretariat has issued 6 information papers, and the details have been set out in the agenda. And in front of you, and in the past couple of days, we have also received some other papers which will be distributed to members later on by the Secretariat. Items for discussion at the next meeting and the date. Members, please note that the next meeting was originally scheduled for the 6th of July. It will now be changed to the 13th of July, and that is the second Friday of that month. And the time has also been advanced to 9:45 a.m. The change in time is mainly because we have an item on the Hong Kong Academy or the self-financed post-secondary institutions. It was originally scheduled for discussion on the 6th, but then the chairman of the relevant committee has promised that he will come personally to brief us on the item. So if we want him to be present, then we will have to change the meeting date to the 13th of July, which is a Friday. Again, it's the 13th of July, 9:45 to 11:45 a.m. So for members who have not arrived yet, please, as the Secretariat, inform them of the same. So for the next regular meeting, we will discuss 2 items. The administration proposed to discuss issues related to self-financing post-secondary institutions. And Professor Anthony Zhang will be here to discuss this item. And the other item is remuneration for contract teachers in primary and secondary schools. So for the next meeting, do you have any other proposals for items to be discussed? Mr. Ted Hui. I have earlier written in a letter to the EDB, and which has replied to me, and I would like to discuss issues concerning review of textbooks and the work of the textbook review panel. And the issue has sparked heated discussions, and parents are very concerned about who are in the vetting panel. If we don't name the persons, at least we should be given to understand how the work process is like. So I hope that, Madam Chair, you can include this as a discussion item. Mr. Ted Hui has written in on the 2nd of May, and the letter has been passed on to the EDB, and the EDB has given a reply to a letter on the 25th of May. So, Mr. Hui, it's already June today. We will talk to the administration to see if that can be included in the next meeting. Any other views? Mr. Yip Kin Yuen. Madam Chair. Mr. Yip Kin Yuen. Madam Chair. Yes, Madam Chair. On the 2nd of May, together with 5 other members, Helena Wong, Shiu Ka-chun, Tanya Chen, Au Nok Hin, have proposed to discuss the matters relating to the appointment of academic staff in UGC-funded universities. And I've also raised the same request in the last meeting, and the next meeting will be the last meeting in this session. And I hope that this item can also be put up for discussion. All my requests have been listed in the letter that I sent last time. I'm not going to repeat those now. So your views are noted. We will talk to the EDB. Mrs. Regina Yip. Thank you, Madam Chair. The TSA will again be implemented, and I think we need to monitor the situation. Will there be over-drilling? Are the questions too difficult? Will the tester pose pressure to parents and children? We need a monitoring mechanism, and the government must come back to report to us on the matter. Dr. Fernando Zhang, I agree with Mrs. Regina Yip's proposal. We have to monitor the TSA. Together with Mr. Dennis Kwok, we have written in at an early stage to propose to discuss legislation on SEN. I have drafted a private member's bill myself. It's been in the queue for a long time, and I hope that this can be put back on the agenda as soon as possible. When we came back for the current session, we have already written in to you. And if that can't be discussed within this session, maybe it should be discussed as early as possible in the next session. Well, for this term, we still have 2 years, but for this session, we still have 2 months. So we would do our best. I have talked to Mr. Kwok. He raised the same request, and I asked whether he can set out the specifics, because the scope is rather broad, and he agreed that he would write again to the Secretariat. Dr. Chang Chang Tai.
This last Tuesday, I submitted a letter on one school, one social worker. I've noted that many deputations have asked that we conduct a public hearing, but it seems like our next meeting is on July 13. I understand time is tight, but public hearing, I wonder whether can be arranged still. If it's not possible, then can we, in the name of this panel, appeal to the government and the Secretary to pledge that counseling associations affected, for example, the Psychological Society or the counseling departments, professors from universities, to get it together for a meeting. So I think we can ask him or convey your concern to the Secretary when he comes in later. So now may I invite the administration to come in. Welcome, Secretary for Education, Mr. Kevin Yang, and Ms. Hong Chen Cui-Wah, Deputy Secretary for Education, and Mr. Lo Pui Lam, Chief CDO. Thank you for coming. So, Secretary, just then, members suggested that about the one school, one social worker plan and the appointment of counselors. Because it is about whether they could lose their jobs or have their contracts renewed. So, Secretary, could you arrange for a meeting with them as soon as possible? Thank you, Chairman. One school, one social worker scheme. I think at the previous meeting, the one before the previous meeting, near the end, we did discuss our concept and plan for the scheme. And our notice to schools actually was issued by the end of April. We are still, of course, getting worries from the counseling and guidance professionals. But what we do is flexible. We allow schools to continue to hire these counselors, so guidance and counseling people. And we have now a meeting with various guidance associations for discussions. And just then I heard from Mr. Chang his view, but it's difficult for us to meet with individual professors because we would try to liaise with various organizations and meet with them, talk to them about what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. So maybe the secretary could help then and see whether we can find a time to set a meeting with them and see which members can attend. And then the Bureau could also send representatives. It does not have to be in the form of a public hearing or in a panel meeting. You can arrange for a separate meeting. Yes, we are lining up people for the meeting. As far as I know, I think at least 2 or 3 associations will be invited, and we'll continue to monitor the situation. We are trying to organize such a meeting. If the panel thinks that there's a need, we can see how we can work together. So, Secretary, so which organizations are you contacting? Can you let us know their names? Let us know, or members, if there are associations that you think the Secretary should meet, you could submit a list to our Secretariat for referral to you. Okay, yeah, we're happy to refer to that. Okay, before going to the next item, let me remind you that on the 26th of this month, 10:30 in the morning, we will make a visit to the Hong Kong Academy for Gifted Education. And 10:30, we will depart from Lashko in a coach. So members, please do take part in the visit. So item number 3, updates on promotion of reading. So may I invite the Secretary to take us through the paper, please. Thank you. The Education Bureau attaches great importance to students' reading abilities and habits. We have adopted various strategies to support schools in promoting reading. We have done quite a lot of work indeed, and students' reading abilities is quite high. But we do want to further enhance students' interest in reading. And right now, we have actually promoting a reading culture in Hong Kong to try to build Hong Kong into a reading city. The Education Bureau will, on the existing basis and advantages, try to gather various resources to foster the reading culture. Hopefully, through creative, interesting, and multiple activities, from now on, we will try to further nurture students' reading interest and habit, and to help students exercise their creativity. We believe that we need all sources of support, including curriculum design, school planning, teachers' professional knowledge and allocation resources, parents and stakeholders' support, and a social atmosphere to promote reading. So we need to progress with times and meet with the students' actual needs. In our paper, we have given the details on our plans. So members' suggestions are welcome. So I suggest that each member can speak for 3 minutes. So how many members would like to speak? Because on this item, because it's mainly a report by the Secretary, and there are also 2 other items of even greater concern. So I would like to allocate more time to the following 2 items on the agenda. So on this item, promotion of reading, anyone who wants to speak? Regina Ip, Zhang Guoguan, Zhang Chiu-hong, Vincent Chang, Ted Hui, and Yip Kin Yun. Okay, that's all. So I'll draw a line here. Regina Ip. Thank you, Chairman. I personally like reading very much. Of course, I support plans to promote reading. But I find that your ways of promotion are limited to encouraging people to take videos, give talks, share about what they've read. I find it quite regretful. When I was small, we used to write book reports every month. So after reading, besides reading to broaden your horizon, it's important also to give you a chance to write. And now you're going to give more resources to schools to hire degree teachers and increase the teacher-student ratio. Would you then ask teachers to get the students to write more? As an employer, I found that for local graduates, everyone can speak, but they can't write well. You need to be able to write. Besides, shooting videos, everyone is shooting videos now, or write online, or post blogs online, or express their views with emojis. They are all very superficial. So would you encourage the Education Bureau to encourage teachers to get students to write book reports? I remember the expensive boarding schools overseas that students manage to get into elite colleges because they are asked to write back what they have read. Yes, of course, reading fosters writing. If you look at the paper, our direction is such that we want to encourage students' interest to read. For details, please, I'll pass the time to Mrs. Hong. Yes, for reading promotion, it's not something new. It has been implemented for years under the existing curriculum. In some schools, regular programs, besides the volume of books to read, students are also expected to write book reports. So we are targeting students' interest in reading, and we want to sustain and enhance their reading further. And we should not neglect that we have to rely on the support of school-based support, for example, libraries, and that we will collaborate with various schools on subject basis, and we might actually increase demand for book reports, but we don't want to make it a rule that schools must get the students to write reports, because that could pose a heavy burden to the students. So that's what we mean by school-based approach. Well, I don't think that you should not encourage them to write because of worries of posing a burden. You should challenge the students more. It's to help them build a habit. Every year, where many people publish books in the book fair, and the most popular books are on feng shui, astronomy, cooking, travel, and so forth. So if you get the students to read whatever they like, then it may not be really that beneficial to them. So okay, elaborate more on our school-based strategy. Well, schools should be given the task to choose books. They have their own professional perspectives. It's different from the book fair, which is open to everyone. I agree with Mrs. Yip. Why should we create a burden? Reading should be fun. You should not get people to read to pose heavy pressure on them. Next one is Jung Kok-kwon. I support the government's making more efforts to promote reading. I like reading myself. DAB, on April 18, we carry out a survey on Hong Kong's reading habits. The reading atmosphere here isn't really heavy. 40% of the people said they did not read. So if you can read 3 hours for a week, then that's only about 10% of the respondents. So the atmosphere isn't strong. I agree with what the paper says, that reading interest should be nurtured at a young stage, particularly at kindergartens, when you, besides watching TV, going online, if you teach the small kids to like to read, that's important. My own 2 daughters are in kindergarten. I always read with them, and now they will pick up a book on their own and even catch me to read stories to them. So parents' involvement is very important. Creativity is also important. It's not just about what types of books to read. 2 nights ago, my youngest daughter showed me an English book and asked me to read it to her. And then she asked me to explain about it to her in Putonghua. Well, I complied because books are just a medium through which I can convey knowledge to her and also build up our ties. So over time, they would like to pick up a book to know more about the world. Therefore, I support the policy. But in the paper, I can see that the government is going to provide a recurrent subsidy. Secondary and primary schools will have annual subsidies. But for each school, it has different number of classes and students. So is the subsidy a fixed amount for each school? If so, then would it mean that the different schools may have different amounts available on a per capita basis? That would be unfair. So how would you deal with the subsidy? Yes, Chairman, I'm very pleased to hear Mr. Zhang's own personal experience. What we want to encourage now is, particularly at the kindergarten stage, we want parents to take the lead because that will be very useful for developing an interest in reading among schools. As for allocation of funding, Mrs. Hong, please. Yes, for the reading subsidy is for secondary and primary schools.
For primary and secondary schools, when we dish out grants, we will go it on the basis of the number of classes, and the details will be mapped out together with the relevant association. We will take reference from a previous program, and we will give out the grant based on the number of classes. As for kindergartens, I think the situation is a bit special, as mentioned in the paper, because there is no library in a kindergarten like the primary and secondary schools. So we will communicate further with the trade or sector and see what resources are needed by kindergartens before the details are mapped out. Next one, Dr. Fernando Zhang. Madam Chair, what matters most in promoting reading is to give them sufficient space to read. Now, Hong Kong students' reading ability ranked top around the world in pearls among the 50 countries in the well, we ranked third, and we had once been the ranked top. But then in terms of reading, interest of reading, we ranked last around the world. That's a shame on our part. We force our students to read, we drill them, so much so that their reading ability is very good. But the fact is they don't want to read. They read just because they have to take exams. So they have the lowest interest in reading, and they have the lowest level of engagement in reading. So is this what we want to see as our students? We should not just be looking at their ability. Rather, we should see whether they are motivated and interested to read. Now, they don't have the time. They have to go to a full-day school, and they take tutorial classes after that, and then they have to do homework in the evening. So they don't have time to read. And on the weekends, their time is filled up with all sorts of activities, not to mention reading. They don't even have time to play and sleep. So EDB, please think about this. Well, the cultivation of reading habits cannot be done just by giving out, say, tens of thousands of dollars to the schools. And I find it strange that the cap on the grant is $40,000 on primary schools, $70,000 on secondary schools, and for special schools is $30,000. It's an amount lower than primary schools. I understand books for secondary schools are more expensive, but does it mean that books for special schools are cheaper than those for primary schools? What's the rationale? So EDB, you must conduct a review as to whether you should allow or create more time and space for students to read, and also for the specific amount to be given out. Can you explain why the amount for special school is lower than primary schools? Secretary, please. In our paper, and as I said in my introductory remarks, our aim this time is to enhance the interest of reading of students, and students can nurture the habit of reading from a young age. Now, Dr. Zhang referred to a busy curriculum and students don't have time to read. So we are adopting a school-based approach, and we hope that the schools can take the lead in promoting the reading interest and habits. So the pressure talked about by Dr. Zhang can be eased. Now, as for the amount of subsidy, well, we consider that the number of students in special schools is normally lower than the primary school. So in terms of resources, that's how we made the arrangement. We are not mindful about the cost of the books. Well, you have to look at the interest of the students in reading. For some schools, they may be adopting more advanced technology in promoting reading, so you have to take that on board. Now, after I've drawn the line, some other members have come in and they have raised their hands, including Mr. Ao Nok Hien, Mr. Wilson Orr, and Mr. Leung Yu Chung, with 3 members. We have drawn a line already, and as I said, there are 2 items following which I believe will be of concern to members. So I will allow these 3 other members to speak, but only 1 minute will be allowed. Mr. Vincent Zhang. Thank you, Madam Chair. I, of course, support promoting reading. Now, it's like the books are competing against the electronic games. Now, I say on a Sunday in the restaurants, children used to read books, but now they are playing electronic games. Of course, electronic games are more interesting, but then reading helps students, children in adopting critical thinking and so on. Now, the paper talks about the grant, $40,000, $70,000, etc. And schools have libraries, and usually they have funding for them to purchase books, and they will also organize seminars. So how is this grant different from previous grants? And secondly, and people buy a lot of books at book fairs. Maybe middle income families can buy a lot of books, but then for grassroots children, they may not buy so much. And then in the community, there is book exchange programs organized all the time. So can the government take the lead to encourage schools and NGOs to organize book exchange programs? Secretary, please. Thank you, Mr. Zhang, for your question. For example, books exchange programs, actually we are encouraging schools to do that. Now, for this grant, it's not just about purchasing books. It's a higher amount than previous subsidies. Can I defer to Mrs. Hong? The schools can all along use grants under OEBG to purchase books. So schools can use other grants on top of promotion of reading grant to buy books. But for this particular grant, apart from buying books, we hope that schools can organize school-based programs to stimulate students' interest in reading. So they should take a comprehensive look and maybe introduce interesting programs. They can engage stakeholders to organize programs, for example, authors, and they can organize parent-child programs, role-play activities. All these need resources, so the grant can be used for that as well. A simple follow-up. Now, in the past, what is the budget for schools to buy books in the past? Is this a high, for this grant, is this a high amount or low amount? Mrs. Hong, if they use OEBG, well, I think the school is free to use that, the amount under that. Now, if a school gives a top priority to promoting reading, then they will be deploying a lot of resources to do that. Some schools have told me that they've used over $100,000 to buy books. So different schools differ. Mr. Ted Hui. In paragraph 11 in the paper, it is mentioned, we talk about the PEARLS, Progress in International Reading Literacy Study. Going by the statistics, Hong Kong students rank top among the world. But then for the interest in reading, I mean, Hong Kong's students are lagging behind, lower than the average. Now, people think that the reading is an ability which can help them find jobs, but it is not regarded as an interest, and its benefits have been overlooked. So there has not been a high interest in reading generally in this society. I support what the paper proposes. I, as a parent myself, as a dad myself, it is good if parents can participate in children's reading. You can't force secondary school students to read, and reading interest should be groomed at the young age, and the parents' participation is so crucial. The paper mentions about parents' training, parents' participation. I hope that the EDB can do more on that front. Of course, there is a prerequisite, and that parents should not be spending their time to help students complete their homework. And that brings us back to the question of drilling. Now, there is over-drilling, too much homework, too many tests and exams, etc. These are issues that the EDB must squarely face. Now, you said that reading is included as part of the curriculum, and students can spend part of their school time in reading, and that's, I think, an effective measure too. Reading can also take place outside of the school curriculum. There are a number of reading clubs being established. For my office, we have collaborated with reading clubs to encourage parents to read together with their children. There are different models being implemented. Some are on commercial models, some are being operated volunteers. And I think the EDB should give more support to these reading activities. I mean, they are more interesting in a way. I hope that in terms of your policy and financial support, you can do more to encourage that kind of activity. Can you consider that, Secretary? In our paper, we said that we welcome schools to collaborate with different community bodies, including NGOs and other bodies. We welcome that. And the schools can make their own decision based on their own resources. We also have a lot of collaboration with the LCSD. We hope to escalate the interest of reading in the society as a whole. And if parents are interested in reading, they can have an impact on their children. We want to promote this kind of reading habits in the society as a whole. Mr. Yip Kin Yun, when we talk about promoting reading, we attach a lot of importance to it. And if the children are interested in reading, I mean, their learning experience will be very different. They will learn a lot more. They can have broader interest, which is good. So this time, the government will be launching this recurrent promotion of reading, $40,000, $70,000, and $30,000. We welcome that. Now, money, of course, is not the only issue here. Interest is also important. And the EDB now focuses on stimulating interest. I think it's a right approach. Dr. Fernando Zhou referred to a survey which is inspiring. Well, our students have high reading ability, but in fact they are not interested, and that will affect their whole learning experience. So we should start stimulate reading interest at a young age. What should we do? There should be two focuses here. One is how to allow more time for students to read. the points made by members are good. Now, this is very much a pressure rights system. And earlier I went to a teacher librarians gathering. I talked to them. And this teacher, who is a parent himself, he said that his son has to do homework right up to 11 p.m. And they are very helpless. And if that is the case, how can they read? How can they develop an interest in reading? And within the system, there is so much homework and there are a lot of assessment tests, and people are suffering. And this is something that we must mull over. Second is about strengthening our language courses, and we also overlook the importance of the role of the teacher librarian. Mrs. Hong said that schools can organize a lot more activities. These are tasks that can be undertaken by teacher libraries. But then teacher libraries told us that they have to teach, they have to undertake administrative work, so they can't put a lot of time into the library. And then for some posts, there are already guidelines, so the EDB can consider issuing a guidelines for the role of the teacher librarian. Maybe the parents and the principals are not do not know how the teacher librarians can play the best role. So if there is such a guidance, then that will help a lot. Mrs. Hong also said that they will meet with the principals associations to see how to promote reading. And I suggest that the EDB can also meet with the teacher librarians and the language teachers to consult them, because they are in the best position of what work can be done. If you can help them, then you are in fact helping the students. I hope that the administration can consult also the teacher librarians and the language teachers.
So, Vice Chairman, you made his points. So now, well, some members came late, so now they will have 1 minute to speak. Ao Long Hin isn't here, so Au Chong Shing, please, 1 minute. Chairman, I am 200% support this latest measure to promote reading. And, children nowadays look at their smartphones more than books, so it's something worrying. But I think, Secretary, the main problem is the homework. It's just so much that students always, when they're home, they struggle with finishing the homework, the heavy load of them. So I wonder whether now that you have your efforts to promote reading, whether they'll work in the end. So, Chairman, I'd like to ask the administration, how are you going to monitor and assess the effectiveness of your latest promotion? How can you monitor and assess the effectiveness of your plan? Secretary, 10 seconds. It's really difficult, particularly if our focus is on cultivating interest in reading. It's really difficult for us to, do that quickly. We mentioned pearls a lot, which measure people's or students' reading interest. So I think through that, another medium will monitor the situation. I haven't taught for a few years, but when I was a teacher, secondary school teachers told me that if a good foundation is laid at primary school, then the students will do better in secondary school. So if you have students cultivating the reading interest in primary school, then they will do better in secondary school. But it seems like your resources allocated, they are less for primary schools compared to secondary schools. Mrs. Hong said resources can also be used to organize activities, not just buying books. But it's in the primary school stage where parents are encouraged and also do organize activities more with their kids. So why are there fewer resources given to primary schools? So can you reconsider allocating more resources to primary schools so that schools can organize activities encouraging parents to read with their kids? Can we do that? 5 seconds, Secretary. Chairman, Give me more seconds. I'll ask Mrs. Hong to respond. So, members, if you really want Secretary to respond, please give them more seconds. Mrs. Hong, please. Well, let me reiterate. This is not just through the subsidy to buy books or organize activities alone. Currently, in their expanded subsidy, schools and class grant or subject grant, they can still use the money there with flexibility. So it's a school-based approach. It's up to the schools how much resources they want to put in. Next one, sorry. Fernando Zhang, could you take down your banner or placard? Because your placard is hiding the other member's face. Next one, last one, Chen Chi-chun. I'd like to ask about paragraph 7D. In the paper where it mentions about a book list, recommended book list. How did it come about? Is it recommended by a committee? What's the mechanism involved? What if we want to update a book list? And also, are they only recommended that schools are not obliged to follow the list? Mr. Yang or Mrs. Hong, please. For Chinese English subject colleagues, all along, they have made recommended book lists for schools. In kindergartens, we have started to study not a recommended book list, but more on how to choose the books. The schools don't have to follow them. But we are looking at schools which we think are appropriate, and we would list them for schools' reference. And we're also studying what schools should be recommended to kindergartens. We're still studying it. So this is just an internal recommendation. Okay, so just recommendations. Now is item number 4. Proposed setting up of the Student Activities Support Fund. This involves financial implications. So if you have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest, please, before you speak, declare your interests. On this paper, I would like to ask Undersecretary for Education to take us through it. So let's invite the Undersecretary to come in. Dr. Choi, could you take us through the paper, please? Thank you, Chairman. The Hong Kong Jockey Club Lifelong Learning Fund, that is the JCLWL Fund, will lapse at the end of 2018-19 school year. The government proposes the creation of the support fund to support students' engagement in lifelong learning to foster whole person development. The Financial Secretary, in its budget for 2018-19, already reserved $2.5 billion for that purpose. So I would now explain to you the reason for setting up the fund and its use. Hong Kong's curriculum focuses on cultivating students' autonomous learning, and we also put emphasis on whole person development so that our next generations can have rich learning experiences and can equip themselves through diversified multiple learning experiences and live a full life, and also identify their interests. We encourage students to go out of the classroom to learn in the real environment. For families with lesser income, the exposures could be limited. The lifelong learning provided by schools help them to uncover their interests and broaden the horizon. You can see that lifelong learning is particularly important to the underprivileged. In the 2002, the Hong Kong Jockey Club Charities Trust, together with the Education Bureau, set up the JCLWL Fund to support students with financial needs so they can take part in school-organized or recognized LWL activities. Right now, 90% of primary and secondary schools are receiving the JCLWL Fund, benefiting more than 210,000 students each year. The fund helps broaden students' horizons and develop their potentials and talents. Over the years, the LifeY Fund has supported students in need and given them useful experiences. By the 2018 and 19 school year, the fund will come to an end. So the government likes to thank the Jockey Club for its long-standing support for the school sector. We also think that there's a need to continue support for the financially needy students. We propose set up a new fund with an endowment of $2.5 billion and $46 million as non-recurring commitments to meet the financial needs for the 2019-20 school year. The returns of the fund, investment returns from the fund, will be used to provide stability for students in need. But publicly funded schools and DSS schools will benefit. We would lay down the operational mode for the proposed fund, and because now the subsidy is currently set up by the government for LifeY Fund subsidy for students, each school can be given a grant depending on the number of schools receiving CSSA and STAS full subsidy. That's based on the number of such students. Each student would be entitled to 650 in secondary schools and 350 in primary schools. Since various families, for various reasons, have not applied for SSA or STAS, and if they cannot afford to pay for the fees for LifeY learning activities for their kids, we propose that schools can lay down their own school-based criteria to meet the needs of such needy students so that they can also at the same time benefit from the support grant. The ceiling is 25% of the subsidy obtained by the schools, and the subsidy will be available from the 2019-20 school year. We would, on the basis of the financial situation of the fund, adjust the SAS grant and operational details for schools. Later, we also review the mechanism concerned and consult the school sector. Setting up the Student Activities Support Fund, should it be supported by the panel and the finance and approved by the Finance Committee, the Education Bureau will make appropriate investment arrangements for the fund, and in accordance with the necessary provisions, appoint a trustee and also submit audited accounts of the fund to LegCo every year. We're happy to answer members' questions. So members who would like to ask questions? Yip Kin Yun, Chun Chiu Hong, Chen Chi Chun, Leung Chi Chung, Vincent Chang, Oh Chong Shing, Ted Hui, 7 of them altogether. Each will have 3 minutes. Right now, well, if there's time, well, you may have, but I don't think you have 3 minutes anyway. We may not have that much time. The first one is Yip Kin Yun. Let me remind you all that if you have any declaration of interest, please do so. Well, I haven't found any conflict of interest on my part. Okay. The Activity Support Fund, in the past, used to be funded by the Hong Kong Jockey Club. The Hong Kong Jockey Club promoting fund, you cannot expect, Jockey Club to do anything for the benefit of students. But now the government is just following the old path. But is it enough? It seems like we have taken a retrograde step. Paragraph 6 in the paper, it says that the scope of subsidy in the past actually benefited more than 210,000 students each year. But in paragraph 9, looking to the future, it mentions that there are about 182,000 people or expected beneficiaries. So why the drop to 182,000? And you're giving support to the STAS full recipients, but why not support being given to STAS half recipients? Can we not expand the number of beneficiaries rather than shrinking it? And also for the amount, compared to the Jockey Club Fund, the total amount seems to have increased. In the past, it's a little bit for everyone. Now, under the government, it's like, well, do we still need to stick to such a small amount? It's only 650 for secondary students and 350 for primary students. For the whole year, a whole year subsidy of several $100s. What can they be used for? We heard from some deputations just then. They gave us figures on the cost of tutorial and interest classes. Even one session of an interest class would exceed the amount of subsidy provided. If a student is very interested in something or talented and wants to enroll in an interest class, so how can the subsidy really help ease the financial burden? So first is the number of beneficiaries and the other is on the amount of support. So could you consider that now in the school for a year, where the money may not be used up all year, in the whole year, and it could be saved by a school, and depending on the circumstance, depending on the applications by individual students, so the students could save up the amount and then allocate as it wishes.
The government should also consider reviewing whether there should be a substantial increase or marked increase in the grant level to meet with the actual needs of the grassroots students. Mr. Yip, you have spent all your time in asking a question. Maybe the Secretary, you can give an overall response later on. Dr. Fernando Zhang, Mr. Yip Kin Yun has talked about the crux of the problem. If the grant is there to help primary and secondary students, and so that those with a lack of means can enjoy equal opportunity in taking part extracurricular activities, while for the grassroots students, their need goes far beyond what can be met by $350 and $650. And the scope doesn't cover the stats half recipients. We think this is an inadequacy. Or CSSA, stats full and stats half families should come under the subsidy scope. And the scheme is not transparent. We're never sure exactly which students will get the subsidy. Now, the school organizes certain activities, and if the students enroll in activities, and the students' the situation will be looked at before the subsidy is dispersed. And then for stats half students, their eligibility, they are selected by drawing lots. I think we can adopt the principle of money following the user and say every student will be given a certain amount, and it will be up to the students to select the programs in and outside schools that they would like to take part in. As long as the relevant criteria are met, then they should be allowed the subsidy. A lot of secondary schools will look at the students' extracurricular activities when they select or enroll students. If students don't have a particular expertise, they are at the short end of the stick when they try to enroll for a school. I think this is a basic need and requirement. It's not something extra. I think it's a basic responsibility of the government. Would you consider Well, I forgot this placard. You asked me to put it down. No, I'm putting it up again. So the subsidy level should be increased, and the subsidy selection and methodology should be improved, and it should cover more students, including the STARS half recipient students. Undersecretary, on the targets for the subsidy, they are mainly the CSSA and STARS full recipient families. And in fact, schools can have the flexibility and can exercise discretion to disperse a grant to those in financial needs or who are STARS half recipients, and to alleviate their financial burden. These schools do now have that flexibility. Now, the amount was drawn up based on the amount under the charities, the Jockey Club scheme, and the utilization rate is around 95%. It shows that schools are making very good use of the subsidy. And actually, we have increased the subsidy amount, and we have streamlined the whole process as well. And I think it will be more helpful to schools in using the subsidy. Why is the subsidy? What doesn't the subsidy cover? Tuition fees for, say, piano and swimming lessons, etc. Now, I must clarify, for this SAS fund, it is supplementary in nature. We want to help needy students. Actually, a lot of different resources and channels are being used right now. So, for example, the CCF will subsidize needy students in buying laptop computers on the student basis. So the SAS fund is really targeting at helping students learning. And so that's why we are not allowing parents to enroll their students or children in courses. So we talk about life LWL here, and we want the courses to be related to their curriculum and learning. And we don't want to exert additional pressure on students. We don't want students to take, say, piano, swimming lessons just because there is a subsidy. And we want to take care of the learning needs of students. So that's why we will only cover LWL activities organized or recognized by the schools. We want to also lessen the financial burden of the needy students. So these two conditions have to be met before the subsidy is given. So that's also the main purpose of the grant. Now, for extracurricular activities, we also have after-school activities grant, and every student will be given $400. And if the fund is put to good use, then the amount will be increased to $600. So for needy students, we are resorting different avenues to help them. We want to be more targeted in utilizing the different funds, and which should be put to the best use. Mr. Raymond Chen, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to ask a very fundamental question. Why do we have to establish a fund and then try to get an investment return for subsidizing the fund? Now, for paragraph 9, the annual funding is $19.1 million, and the government anticipates that if the investment return is in the range of 3.7 to 4.9% a year, it will be able to generate investment income of about $92.5 to $125 million each year to serve as a stable source of funding. But then the investment return may not be as high as expected, and the government then will have to inject further into the fund. And some members also asked for raising the subsidy level. Then it means there is a need for further injection into the fund in order to generate a higher investment return to meet the needs. My question, why are you adopting such an approach? If they can actually use the principle of the fund, well, that can also last 25 years. Maybe you can even try to do it by way of giving out recurring funding? Why do we have to do it by the way of an investment return and then the fund? And why are you not using the principle of the fund? Under Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair. As I said, the government has been using different channels, strategies, and financial sources to help needy students and to implement certain education policies. For the SAS fund, we hope to continue with the operation or the support provided by the JCLWL fund. So this is a more flexible use of resources by the proposal we made, and the fund is more flexible. We want to have a long-term and stable commitment. So that's why we are establishing this seed fund, and we are not making use of the principle of the fund. And member said he is concerned about the lower than expected investment return. Will we be cutting down the subsidy level? No, that will not be the case. If the investment return is not sufficient, then a small part of the principal can be used to finance the funding. And if in the long term we find that the investment return does not suffice, then we can conduct a review on what should be done in the long term. Well, this is about a funding application to be submitted to the FC. I have great reservation on this funding model. Mr. Leung Chi-Chang. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, the Jockey Club has been running this program all along. It's been successful, and I wonder why they are handing it back to the government. Maybe the government thinks it's a good program. They would like to take it up themselves. And you are dispersing a similar amount as in the past, $350 for primary and $650 for secondary students. Now, for primary schools eligible, the number is 94,000. Secondary school students, 88,000 students eligible. So you come up with a certain amount which you said will meet with the financing needs. Now, Mr. Ip Kin Yuen shows us a list of the fees involved, and if you just talk about $350, then that won't suffice. So, Under Secretary, well, you said that $2.5 billion will be put into a seed fund or endowment fund. That's your consideration. But we think $350 is too little because tuition fees and program fees are ever rising. So how can that be sufficient? Would you consider increasing the subsidy amount? Mr. Raymond Chan said that you can do more. Maybe you can have $3 billion as the endowment fund, and it will generate a return to finance the fund. Maybe you are concerned that the FC will not endorse it, but then this time round, the pro-establishment and opposition camp members share the same view, and that the subsidy amount of $350 is too low. Maybe the families will have to pay $600 themselves, and then maybe they find it not affordable and they will opt not to participate. Now, why are we setting the subsidy amount as $350 and $500? And that is based on the previous program. I mean, the amount is supplementary in nature. We're not paying the entire course fees for them. The students will have to pay something, and going by past experience, the amount should suffice. The subsidy is just really supplementary in nature, and it is targeting at LDWI activities, and we think that the amount level is sufficient to help needy students. Now, LWL activities are different from after-school programs. The former is part of our curriculum, and for after-school activities, I mean, they come in all different forms, and so that's why LDWL activities have to tie in with the curriculum. And these are very different from interest classes. But maybe some of the LWL activities can also be interest classes, but they are not equivalent to after-school activities. And on the amount of $2.5 billion and not $3 billion, we have to come up with a reasonable amount. According to statistics over the past 10 years from the Jockey Club, this is the calculation that we have come up with, and we say that an annual refunding of $90 million or so is needed. And based on the investment return of the exchange fund in the past 10 years, 3.7% investment return should suffice. So we will not be asking for a larger amount or asking for an amount in advance. Well, we said that $350 is not enough, so that means $90 million is not enough too. Now, 350 and 650. Well, the utilization rate in the past is 95%. And in the Jockey Club scheme, there was also an incentive program. If the schools were using the fund in a good way, then they can ask even for more. So it seems that the amount is sufficient. Mr. Vincent Chang, $300 a month is not enough. So then we talk about $350 a year. The amount is too little. This is subsidy for grassroots students. $350 a year is grossly insufficient. Of course, you say that there are other forms of subsidies as well. But as pointed out by some members, well, the subsidy amount is too meager, and students will not be interested in using the amount. And CE has been talking about the certain voucher, and ultimately I found that she was in fact referring to this particular scheme. It's a far cry from what we are asking for.
Secretary, I heard that more than 100 schools are willing to let sports associations use their sports facilities. But the effectiveness of that doesn't seem to be good. Sports associations told me, however, that they're interested in entering the schools, provide support, for example, teaching students various athletic activities. It's not just about money. You can join hands with various sports associations and other kinds of support funds to see what kind of matching we can do. Undersecretary, thank you for your view. Schools, well, have actually come up with all sorts of modes, depending on their own circumstances, in collaborating activities with, for example, charity associations. Yes, now there are more than 100 schools actually are looking for support, and yet but only about 10 sports associations, which actually, however, may not be that keen to stay in the partnership because of all sorts of concerns. So you need to look more into it. Yes, each school's premises is different, so we do need to find out more about what the school situations are. Next one, Chongqing. Thank you, Chairman. I think the Lifelong Learning Fund is, I do support it. In the past, when it was operated by JCRW Jockey Club, for the JCRWL fund, it was very popular, and more than 210,000 students benefited, so it's something good. But let me tell you, Undersecretary, I found that 350 for primary students, 650 for secondary students a year is just too little. If the government is to shoulder responsibility for the fund itself, then you need to really review the amount of grant, because things are so expensive now. The current grant amount or subsidy amount is just too little, pitiful for the students. And now you are going to benefit CSSA and STAS full recipients. But how about those receiving just half STAS? And so these students may not be able to get the support they need after going through all the procedures. So can you not consider extending help to them as well? And thirdly, in my own district, I found that students are most concerned about the following. Firstly, how they can get the money back. In the paper, you said that in September, August, and February, March, you will disperse the grants to schools. But from the schools getting the money from you, how long will it take for them to pay back the parents? We do want to know how long it'll take. How have you done it? Are you going to optimize your method? And also, just that you talk about SAS full recipients and CSSA recipients, it's up to the schools to decide on the beneficiaries. But have you given any criteria or templates to schools to help them administer the disbursement of the grant effectively? And thirdly, about the review in the paper, you just briefly mentioned you review the fund over time, but what is the mechanism used? Would it be 1 year, 2 years afterwards? And what will the review involve? What sort of criteria would you use? You need to let the education sector know that you're really trying to do something good. Under Secretary, the first question on how long would it take for parents to get the money back? Let me clarify. The CSSA, STAS full recipients are actually figures used to let the schools decide how much grant they need. The schools themselves would look at the whole grant, and then depending on the activities, lifelong learning activities needed, and then it would work out how to allocate resources. So, secondly, for some good practices by schools, we are aware of that. We've collected them, and we do share them with the sector. Some schools have done very well in terms of good use of resources, so we always cite those good practices with other schools. And in terms of the review mechanism, we would take note of the data and collect opinions. I think about in 3 years' time, we'll carry out a review, because that's the end of a learning stage, and it's more appropriate to do the review at that stage. Ted Hui next. Of course, I agree with other members that 350 a year is way too little. And also, Under Secretary, you just said that it's part of the curriculum. The money will be spent for activities that's part of the curriculum, for lifelong learning. So that if that's the case, I think the amount is still too little. You need to think about adjusting it and whether to extend it to STAS half recipients. And my question is, for the entire fund, how about its sustainability? The JCLWL fund, over the past 17 years, for every few years, it would inject new funding from $100 million to $200 million each time. So when it made new injections, the fund had increased. At the last stage, it was up to $93 million a year in grant. So you're saying, but then what you project for the grants in the future seems to be lower than what we have seen. So if you are injecting $2.5 billion, one-off endowment, would that be enough to cope with future needs? Of course, we need to look at the economic environment later on as well, but I'm just worried about the sustainability of your fund itself. Whether you can really provide for the needs of the poor families, over 5-6 years, and Do you think that you have enough money to cover the lifelong learning activities? And also, I also read from a submission by a joint coalition. They carried out a survey which found that only 3% of the 200-odd applicants managed to get the grant. The reason was because of oversubscription. So I'm really worried when the money is in the hands of the schools. For some activities that are popular, how can you make sure that the popular activities will be made available to all the students in need? Because you need to make sure that there are enough support. Yeah, about the sustainability of the fund, as I answered just then, in the past, the performance of the fund, well, we think that even if with the lowest return rates, it will be sufficient. But if it's not sufficient, we can still get support from the original endowment. So members, you're worried about chances of students getting or the schools getting enough grant. So, but it all depends on the number of CSSA, SDS full recipients. So, in other words, the performance of the fund will not affect how much grant a school gets. As for the quota for activities, well, the quota for school activities is affected by various factors, including space, safety, nature of activities, and so forth. So we need to draw lots, not because you cannot afford it. It's just because the activity itself is constrained by all sorts of external factors. So regardless of their financial backgrounds, all students will have equal chance. Okay. If the 19 million odd fund is available in a year, if it's not sufficient, are you prepared to inject new funding? If it is too much into the fund, then we'll consider using other financial means. Okay, so I have some questions. I already asked questions, but I'd like to know this. The Undersecretary, do you know that some kids, they are eligible for CSSA, but under the JCLWL fund for many years, several years, because schools drew lots to pick recipients for grants, so they were not chosen because of the limited budget. One kid told me that, well, they didn't get any support every year. Every time he was not selected. So that means that from a young age, the child, was deprived of learning activities. There are also SDS half recipients. They are not from rich families at all. They also said that they asked whether they could be given a grant as well, because they want to join some activities, and the families concerned struggled to, pay the hundreds of dollars in fees. And small children have different talents. Some like to draw, others like sports. If you keep asking them to attend cultural activities, but for those students who are chosen to attend the cultural activities, they may find them boring. So some parents suggested, why don't you just put the money in our e-wallet and let the families decide what activities to take part in, what school activities to join, and just get the parents to apply. So I made these 3 points. Actually, they do summarize what members have said. And earlier I met with some parents groups. That's the common echo of the parents. So I hope that, Undersecretary, you really can think about it. Do I have time to respond? Yeah, 1 minute, Undersecretary. Undersecretary, 1 minute. Well, talk about drawing lots. Let me share with parents here. Whether you are CSSA or SDS recipients or not, it's nothing to do with the drawing lots. Please don't mix them together. Whatever family background you are from, learning activities or opportunities should not be affected. As I said, sometimes we have to draw lots because the activities is just oversubscribed, and because there's limited space, right, available. So it's nothing to do with money at all. And as for SDS half recipients, we've mentioned that schools can, depending on their own circumstance, decide to help SDS half recipients. CSA SDS full recipients are just used as the basis for us to determine the amount of grant. As for interest class, we have another after-school support grant that can subsidize students in learning about various skills and enrolling in interest classes. So I think 1/3 of the students, well, you're going to maybe getting the SDAS or other grants. So you may need actually compared to $90 million. Maybe if you have 100 million, that will be enough to meet the needs. Okay, last one, I'll lock in. Thank you, Chairman. I want to clarify something. In the paper, it says that those eligible for the grant number 182,000, and the current JCLWL fund benefits 210,000. Why is the gap of 30,000? Mrs. Hong, could you elaborate on that? Thank you. Let me explain to you. Try to clear up the mystery for you. When we allocate resources, we give the grant to CSA SDS full recipients, the number 182,000. But because there's this flexibility given to schools, for one activity, sometimes schools prefer all students to learn or to take part in an activity. Schools can decide to cover SDS half recipients or any students with huge need. And so it's up to the schools to decide who they want to benefit. So the number of beneficiaries in paragraph 6 may be more than the number used to determine the grant, the total amount of grant. So in other words, 210,000 would be more relevant. Okay. Haven't heard from other members? On investment return, you said it's from 3.7 to 4.9%. It's market projection. I am not sure about how the calculation is like, but nobody knows what we will end up with the investment return. And you said that you will conduct a review to see whether further injection is needed in funding. Well, would you consider regular injection of funds so that more subsidies can be provided for SDS full or SDS half recipients? Can you do that? Under Secretary, we will conduct a review based on the actual experience that will be covered in our future review. I don't have further questions, Madam Chair. We'll have to deal with several motions. Mr. Yip Kin Yun, Dr. Fernando Zhang, and Mrs. Regina Yip has made amendments to Mr. Yip's motion. Since Mrs. Yip is not here, we will not deal with her amendment. Because we were supposed to deal first with Mrs. Yim's amendment. Can somebody move the amendment on her behalf? According to our rules of procedure, for the council meeting, there can be nobody representing her. We support her motion since she has moved her amendment, so we have not moved our amendment. So, would you be submitting your motion then, since Mrs. Yip is not here? Which one? Which one are you talking about? Well, it was an amendment moved by you and Mrs. Yip, right? Since Mrs. Yip
is not here. Well, her amendment will be moved instead by Mr. Horace Cheung. So first, can I ask the amender to Mr. Yip's original motion, Mr. Horace Cheung, to talk about your amendment. So we just add in the name Mr. Horace Cheung here. Mr. Yip, can you read out your motion first? Yes. Yes. As my original reads that the panel proposes that the administration should relax the application threshold for the SAS fund, and the beneficiary scope should be extended to cover all secondary and primary school students on CSSA, STAS full grant, and STAS half grant. We would also propose that the administration increase the subsidy level and formulate measures to increase the probability of eligible students joining subsidized activities. Well, this is an important motion, because at the Finance Committee we'll have to deal with this funding application. So this motion will serve to express the panel's position, and that will have an impact on our scrutiny of the application at the FC. So we don't have a quorum, so can the bell be rung? When the bell is being rung, well, we do need a quorum for taking the vote. Okay, now, and the amender, Mr. Horace Cheung, please take us through your amendment. We basically agreed to Mr. Yip's content, but we're adding it. Well, I said that the panel suggests that the government should relax the application threshold for SAS fund, and the beneficiary scope should be expanded to cover all primary and secondary students on CSSA, STAS full grant, and STAS half grant. And the panel also proposes the government should raise the subsidy amount and formulate policies or measures to increase the chances of eligible students taking part in the subsidized activities. And we add in and also frequently conduct a review on the effectiveness of the additional funding and resources. Do we have a quorum now? Those who are in support of the amendments moved by Mr. Horace Cheung and Ms. Regina Yip, please raise your hand. Unanimous support. And next, we will deal with Dr. Fernando Cheung's motion. So, Dr. Cheung, can you take us through your motion? Yes, thank you. My motion goes like this. For SAS fund, it only goes by the approach adopted by the JCLWL fund. Well, there is a Chinese typo. However, because of the insufficient support, many families, many students from low-income families could only get the subsidy through the drawing of lots. So the panel suggests that the administration should increase the number of quotas, including those who are on CSSA and those who are on STAS full grant and half grant, and adopt the principle of money follows the user principle, so that students and parents can take part in appropriate activities. Those who are in support of Dr. Fernando Cheung's motion, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 are in support. 6 are in support. Do we need to have a claim of division? No? No. Those who are against, please raise your hand. Eight are against. And I declare, I can't hear you. Any abstention? 2. So I declare the motion negatived. Before we move on to the next item, I would like to ask you, do you support submission of this item to the FC? Please switch on Mr. Yip's mic, Madam Chair. There's some problem with my mic today, it seems. Well, they've been very slow in response to what you said. We have passed this motion, and I hope that before the administration can take into account that when you submit your paper to the FC. And Mr. Raymond Chan's question is a valid one, because why are you not going by the means of recurrent funding instead of a fund? Because there are some constraints to the use of fund, and if we don't endorse a fund, does it mean that there will not be enough financing? And then how come that the Student Activities Fund has been turned into an LWL fund? I think these issues have to be addressed, and please do so, administration, before you submit your funding application to the FC. Mr. Raymond Chen, just once one word. Can you give us a supplementary paper to explain why the investment return approach is the best one, and why you're not opting for a fund approach or a recurrent spending expenditure approach? I believe that the administration has heard your views. In your paper to the FC, the government should also review the cost effectiveness. Is it effective in helping students have life-wide learning? So are we all agreeable in submitting the item to FC? No objection? Well, if that is the case, then that will be submitted to the FC. Next, we come to the last item, and that is on development of quality assurance in KG education. Is the Undersecretary here? So can we ask the Undersecretary to take us through the paper? We'll have to extend the meeting time by 15 minutes. Undersecretary, please, over to you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Starting the 2017-18 school year, we have implemented the new KG education policy. The policy objectives are to provide good quality and affordable KG education and enhance accessibility of students to different modes of services that suit their needs. Under the new policy, the government is using various means to enhance the quality of a KG education. We have achieved good progress, and that includes promoting teachers' professional development, catering for students' diverse needs, enhance the QA framework, etc. The QA framework comprises the school self-evaluation SSE by KGs and quality review QR by the EDB, both of which are conducted on the basis of performance indicators, PIs. This time round, we are enhancing, fine-tuning the KG PIs to tie in with the needs of the society and students' needs, and the new education policy and new curriculum guide. The PIs are refined. The new PIs are grouped, refined on the basis of the last version in 2003 and stakeholders' views. And we are restructuring and streamlining the structure and reorganizing the framework so that the various items are more precise and user-friendly. And there are new guiding questions added to encourage schools' reflection and striving for improvement. Modifying the PIs are to tie in with the implementation of the new KG education policy, including the new KG education curriculum guide 2017, and based on the experiences of achievements of KGs. In December 2017, the new PIs were announced and the implementation timetable is announced. And starting from 2017-18, the new PIs will be used for SSEs. And from 2018-19 school year, the EDB will be using the new PIs for QR. And we have organized 9 workshops in the past few months to talk to the stakeholders, and the participants were agreed that there are practical and concrete contents of the briefing sessions could facilitate the use of PIs. We will continue to organize similar activities. Now, secondly, we want to enhance transparency. We will enhance the QR or QA framework transparency. We encourage KGs to upload their school reports on their websites, and from 13-14 school year, we have involved external independent members, external observers in some QR visits. They are all experienced experts who are not currently serving in the education sector. To further enhance the transparency and QR visits, we will be using will capitalize on the professional knowledge of serving KG practitioners. KG principals will join in a pilot scheme in the QR exercise. They will not assess the school performance, but will share their observations. We are now mapping out the details in consultation with major stakeholders. All along, the inspection teams will make an oral report to the KGs and make recommendations for improvement at the end of the QR visit. The QR report is usually written in Chinese and is uploaded on the EDB website. Taking into account views from KGs and parents, we will upload both Chinese and English versions of the QR reports onto EDB's website. Starting from 2018-19 school year, we are happy to listen to members' views, and we welcome suggestions from members and answer members' questions.
Well, this meeting will be extended to 1 p.m. Members available to speak include Michael Tam, Chen Chu-hong, Yu Kin-yun, Ted Hui, Vincent Chang, Lan Ji-cheng, Ao Long-hin, Chen Ka-kwan, 8 altogether. Right? I'll draw a line here. We also need to deal with a motion today. Okay, no more motions? Okay, just one. I'll draw a line for the motion as well because of the time consideration. The first one, Michael Tian. Chairman, I rarely moved a motion asking the government to legislate on regulating the amount of homework. Well, my previous motion was passed and saying that kindergarten students should not be asked to write. In 2017, the Education Bureau revised its guideline for kindergartens adopting our concerns. And yet what happened since then? Well, there were no penalty for a violation of the guidelines. So, despite the new guideline, I also looked at I found from some inspection reports that according to your comment, in one kindergarten, copying and other curriculum design expect very high level of activity from the students in the kindergarten. And in other case, students were asked to do dictations. And another kindergarten is reported that students were asked to fill in the blanks and to write above dotted lines. So, in other words, what you asked kindergartens not to do, they have not listened. And even they have violated the guidelines, they still passed your inspection audit. So what's the point of having the guidelines? They're like toothless tigers. Kindergartens are learning what's taught in primary schools. Primary schools are learning what's in secondary schools being taught there. So things is out of control, even though we now have a new secretary. I hope that you can impose draconian draconian measures to tackle drilling. If anyone violates the rule, you can just do away with your subsidy. If there's no improvement, you can consider legislating. Like in Finland, there is a basic education law stipulating that there should be enough rest given to students. And in Macau, there are penalties for a violation of giving students enough space. Undersecretary, how would you respond to that? On early childhood education and kindergarten students' homework load, members said that all along, in our inspection reports, we do reflect the situation out there. In our revised indicators or guideline, we stated clearly the new curriculum guideline, which states clearly that senior kindergarten students should not. I was asking whether you will impose penalty. As I said, if we found any breach of the guideline, we will ask the kindergarten to stop the practice. If they don't stop, we would mention it in the inspection report so the whole world will know. That's all. That's all. Fernando Zhang, please turn on his mic. Fernando Zhang? Yeah, my mic is on. The quality indicators, I've noted that there are 700 the performance indicators, PIS. There are more than 70 pages, and it covers the PIS, yes, and it covers 4 areas. But from the academic perspective, they're not indicators but more guidelines, because you cannot measure them. Academically speaking, when it comes to PIS, they must be measurable. But what is immeasurable is like in Area 3, school culture, giving students support, caring for them, and giving support to students. The so-called indicator is such that schools will, on the basis of different abilities among students and backgrounds, schools are supposed to adjust the curriculum and teaching strategies. For example, for non-Chinese speaking students, flexibility is needed to cater to their needs and cater to other students' needs. So this is like a description of a direction, but you can't really measure whether schools have done so. Well, you may give them a good score if schools said they have done so, but is it really good? We don't know. I'm not saying that everything has to be measured, because the result of that is schools will only engage in what's measurable. But now you've put everything down in writing, and yet we don't get a clear picture. I'm on 2 groups that I'm most concerned with, SEN groups and ethnic minority students. On what I just read, some associations, including Unison, is worried that schools may wrongly think that non-Chinese speaking students can learn Chinese, a lower level Chinese. What happens is, in some kindergartens, NCS students are taught lower level of Chinese, which makes it difficult for them to articulate with the primary school curriculum. This is really disadvantageous to them, because when they take the Hong Kong TSC, they have to take the same Chinese exam. Next one, Yip Kin Yun. Chairman, we are talking about mechanism for quality assurance. My understanding is it involves SSEs and external reviews. And on the basis of indicators, schools will do the self-evaluation for constant improvement. That's what we hope for. For external review, well, it's also tied to SSEs. So the quality assurance mechanism is one in which schools really need to self-evaluate to make improvement constantly. Otherwise, even if same exercise is repeated, you may not achieve much effects. With the QS mechanism itself, it has no quality assurance for it, so we don't know how effective it is. And just as Michael Tian mentioned an issue, and the issue does not need to be tackled by the quality assurance mechanism. You can tackle the issue mentioned by the traditional inspection approach. If the government wants to see problems tackled like the issue of writing in kindergartens and also catering to NCS students, SEN students, if you have inspectors based at the schools and to provide clear guidelines for the schools to make improvements, or even issue strong guidelines for schools, that's more effective than just writing up reports for the whole world to see, tens of pages of reports with comments that are really just buried, not seen by anyone, not noticed by anyone. So can we actually separate quality assurance from actually inspection that demands accountability? Should we do it that way instead? Move into a new direction? Undersecretary? On the external review mechanism, well, let me answer your first point. I agree that schools' ability to self-evaluate is very important, and that's what we've been trying to encourage through training. Every 6 years, there's a new cycle for schools to be subject to quality audit. So depending on schools' development and self-evaluation could make an impact. And as for the quality evaluation, we mentioned also this time that in the second stage, and we did find that schools had improved in SSEs. And thirdly, about the inspection, targeting teaching and learning and homework load and so forth, we will mention that in our evaluation report. Next one, Ted Hui. Let me declare that my kid is in kindergarten. And for quality assurance, of course, it's intended to foster schools' development and accountability. But someone had asked this already. How do you make them accountable? Like drilling and forcing kindergarten students to write. You know that it's so common in, junior or classes to write. And Undersecretary said that we can write it down in our reports. But that doesn't make a difference. The whole world knows. And there's even a market for helping kindergarten kids to write. So I think you need to enhance accountability. For example, in the sense that schools will have their resources reduced if they're found to have done otherwise what we don't want them to do. And also, lately, many kindergartens have closed all of a sudden. So in the PIS, well, you mentioned you would look at their organization, but does it include their financial management? Some schools are so poorly managed finance-wise that they have to close, or because of the rental hikes, they have to close. Before their closure, some kindergartens, you ask them to inform parents half a year or a year before, and they are also obliged to finish one whole semester. Do they have to finish one whole semester of work teaching before they close? But it's not mentioned in your paper. Would you enforce that to enhance accountability? Well, Mr. Hui asked that the quality assurance, does it cover financial aspects? Yeah, but financial aspects is not covered because schools need to provide independent audited accounts. And just then you talk about schools' accountability, and if it's imposing an unnecessary load, then is it not so good at school? In our inspection or quality assurance, we look at the management resources, teaching and learning, and also promotion of personal development. So if it's not ideal in relation to homework load, and if we, because of that, reduce its resources, that would not help with enhancing accountability, but they only generate negative results. Just as I said that we can let the whole world know what's in our reports, it's meaningful because if the parents support guidelines and support the idea of having appropriate homework load, I think having the comments made in the report would send the biggest warning signal to everyone. Next one, Vincent Chen. The Education Bureaus on performance indicators and quality inspection, they actually have good and bad sides. Of course, it can help schools improve, but the bad side is for primary and secondary schools, the teachers are tired, exhausted from having to meet the requirements and also the admin work required. If you ask me, for kindergartens, I hope that all the kindergarten students can learn happily. But how do we assess where they're happy or not? Is it that if they smile broadly, then that means they're happy? So I do hope that your self-evaluations or other indicators should include room for kindergartens themselves. Because there's a big difference between kindergartens and primary and secondary schools, you need to make sure that kindergarten kids are happily learning. I also agree with Michael Tan's view that some kindergartens, because of their pursuit of reputation, they have actually forced many other kindergartens to do or to follow their approaches. For example, jumping the queue by teaching kindergarten students lots of English words and making students write unnecessarily. So that's not ideal. And other kindergartens are following suit. So what can we do to address the situation so that we can prevent kindergartens from getting their students to learn way to things that they should not be learning at this stage?
Under Secretary, Mr. Chang is concerned about the QR affecting the teachers' workload. We have several measures to address that. All along, we've proposed that the kindergarten or schools should not do something extra for the purpose of quality review. It should be incorporated into their daily work. And then for this time around, we are having a streamlining exercise to reduce the number of PIs, so the whole thing can be streamlined. Thirdly, we're asking a few papers for the QR review. Only one paper is needed: the annual report and the follow-up work plan. So we will continue to communicate with the sector and the frontline teachers so that the QR will tie in with their actual work. Now, you mentioned about parents wanting their children to be competitive, and that as a result there is pressure on children. We know about this, and we will enhance our parent training on that, and we would also strengthen the curriculum guidelines, in particular on the interface between KGs and primary schools. Mr. Leung Chi-Chang. The QR has been implemented for a number of years, and the PIs have been refined this time. I believe that the EDB has taken a number of factors in coming up with this latest PIs for your QR. Then you will be making public the assessment results, and this is something new. Will there be a stigmatization effect? Primary schools, we now have Band 1, Band 2, and Band 3, and some schools are more preferred than others. And for primary and secondary schools, using the terminology of the parents, we have as good schools versus the other not so good. So that kind of labeling now starts at the kindergarten stage, and then for some KGs it will be very popular, and for some other KGs people are not willing to opt for them. So I mean, are we advancing that kind of competition to the KG stage? That's mentioned by some newspaper reports earlier, and that would be an advanced interface between the primary and kindergartens. So some kindergartens have to connect or have ties with certain primary schools, and that would be another kind of competition. Right now, there isn't so much liaison between primary schools and KGs. So how are you going to address that? Undersecretary Mr. Leung referred to the framework of PIs. And this is nothing new. We are just refining it on the basis of the 2003 version. We are enhancing it and streamlining the PIs. The number of PIs have been cut from 32 to 21, and the key areas have been reduced from 71 to 41 in number. And we've also been making public all the information. The only measure to enhance transparency this time is to ask serving KG principals to serve as external observers. This is the only new measure this time. Thirdly, will the QR report stigmatize the KGs? The report sets out the various aspects of the KG, and it's not there to assess or score the KGs. It's just assess out the situation of the KGs. There will be no grading. It's just on student development. Mr. Ao Nok Hin. The performance of the KG, well, it's difficult to avoid a stigmatization effect. In the QR, we should avoid stigmatization as much as possible. Ultimately, the reports will be uploaded to the EDB's website, and there will be PIs, and there will be competition created. So you should try to avoid that as much as possible. What we should be encouraging instead is to ask KGs to improve on their basics. Well, as mentioned by submission of the unison, maybe we should encourage KGs to teach basic Chinese to ethnic minority students. And also there's an important issue of the stability of the teaching force. A lot of KG teachers are leaving KGs all the time, and if you are experienced KG, you may be dismissed, and that affects the teaching quality. No matter how simple or how streamlined the QR is, it will, create extra workload or even cause nuisance to the teachers. Now, the more experienced teachers a KG has, the better the KG will be. And if the experienced KG teachers can be retained, then they would be more happier to write up these reports. So, Undersecretary, would you reduce the number of PIs? Well, the PIs don't have scores attached to them. When we talk about children development, we use only qualitative description. So it will not be possible to compare one KG to another in terms of, say, the banding they're in and so on. And we've all along been encouraging KGs to enroll NCS students, and there is even a subsidy for that. Many people said that there is a lack of transparency where the money has been used. In the report, we will be asked, there will be a box to be asking the KGs to fill that box if there is a grant to them. And we also attach a lot of importance to experienced KG teachers. And if KGs can't afford the experienced teachers, there is a 5-year tide-over grant for the KGs. So no need to worry about that. Before the last member will speak, the Secretariat has reminded me that there is a lack of quorum now to vote on a motion. So let's have the forum bell rung first. And if after 5 minutes there's still a lack of quorum, then we will not deal with the motion. The last one to speak is Mr. Horace Zhang. Madam Chair, everyone expresses our concern about KG education, on whether KG students are writing and there should be an appropriate level of homework. We all agree on those. The KGs play an important role, and well, there is another important question about parents' competitive mindset, and also what is the requirements of primary school. Say if you go for an interview for a primary school place, and if a student is required to know about certain Chinese characters, learn to write, then KGs will definitely try to equip the students with such skills. So every segment of the education system is interrelated, but in Central and Western primary school, parents are complaining that there is no homework, but then some other students are complaining about too much homework. So it's difficult to guess what is in the mind of the parents. Oh, I will not say too much in the interest of time. Let me ask my question first. In the paper, it is said that the schools are required to upload the SSE reports on their website, and they should come up with the development plan for the next year based on this. And it has to do with the reputation of the KGs, because it will affect also the parents' view on my KG. So this SSE may not really reflect the real situation of the KGs. Like when I go to a job interview, then I'm always asked about my shortcomings, and I will always say that I will not decline the request of colleagues and so on. So this may not be the real picture of myself. So how will you deal with that? Under Secretary, you asked a question about the school self-evaluation, SSE. So that should be done on the basis of the objectives set earlier by the KG. So every year, the KG will come up with set with its objectives and development focus. So the evaluation should be compiled based on the objectives set earlier. So they will say that if I have to enhance the development in that aspect, then they will say so, what they're going to do in the next year, etc. And they can. The development focus can be on their advantages and also their shortcomings. So parents will not say this KG is a good or bad one based on the SSE report, but we can roughly know the overall quality of the KGs by their SSE report. Well, there is still a lack of quorum. So can I take this opportunity to ask for a second round, 2 minutes? Okay, you can supplement as in your capacity as the Vice Chairman. Well, I'm speaking for the first time in my capacity as a Vice Chairman. Well, some members have already mentioned this. We have a lot of concerns on the quality of KGs. And for the QA4 framework on the QR poses a heavy burden to KGs. KGs are different from primary and secondary schools in that it's usually relatively smaller in scale, and the teachers are working all the time. They have onerous workload. So if they are to handle a lot of work related to SSE and QR, and they do a lot of paperwork, then it's very tough on them. And we also have the incorporated body of the school sponsoring bodies. So just by working on paperwork alone doesn't mean that you can provide quality education, especially when you spend a lot of your time on paperwork. Then it's going to be a problem, and we must address this. How can we tackle the problem of heavy administrative work leading to less time spent on quality teaching? Undersecretary, well, for KGs, they don't have body incorporated of school sponsoring bodies, so you don't have to worry about that. Second, in quality review, based on the scale of the KGs, we will adjust the days of QR and how we do it. So I believe that our Vice Chairman can further talk to the Undersecretary and have further exchanges. Do we have a quorum? Yes, we do have a quorum now. Now we have a motion moved by Mr. Michael Tian. So Mr. Tian, can you read out your motion? Yes. After the government has issued the KG education curriculum guide, there is still drilling in some KGs, jeopardizing the physical and psychological health of children. We ask that the administration set out clear penalties to monitor the KGs implementing the guidelines to crack down on drilling. If there has not been any improvement after the penalties have been set, the government should take reference from experience in Finland and Macau and explore setting up the goals of kindergarten education by way of legislation to strengthen monitoring the quality of kindergarten education and to rectify the drilling situation. Those in favor, please raise your hand. 7. Those who object, please raise your hand. Abstention? Anyone abstaining? Please raise your hand. 7 for, 0 against, 3 abstentions. I declare Mr. Michael Tian's motion passed. AOB. No AOB. Meeting adjourned.